Back in my day, I know that's a great way to start a message, right? Back in my day, whenever we would take a picture of something, we would call it a snapshot. I don't know what you guys call it today. I mean, maybe it's an Insta, maybe it's just a snap. I mean, you guys seem to just keep shrinking down words to where there's next to nothing there. But, we called it a snapshot back in the day. And one of the things that was so interesting about a snapshot was that it caught just a single moment in time. You know what I'm talking about? It caught just like this single moment in time. It gave you no idea what happened before the picture was taken, and it gave you no idea what happened after the picture was taken. I want to try and illustrate this for you with a few different pictures that I brought with me this week. Any college basketball fans? Really? Okay, well, for those of you who don't know, this is a man by the name of Dick Vitale. And this he goes by a shorter name. It's Dickie V. And Dick Vitale has one of the most notorious voices in all of sports, honestly. And you see this picture, and you're like, okay, there's Andy, and he met Dick Vitale. How fun is that? What you don't see in this picture is what happened just before this picture was taken. I was standing at a urinal at a theater in Branson, Missouri. Luckily, that part is not in the picture. But all of a sudden, I hear there's this man who comes and stands in the urinal right next to me, and he says in this voice that I recognize all too clearly, "Oh, beautiful day out there here today." And I'm like, I know that guy. And I look over, and Dick Vitale is peeing right next to me. It was like the coolest thing ever. So I go out and I leave the restroom, and I didn't want to take the picture in the restroom. And so I go out and I find my wife. I'm like, Dick Vitale's in there. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I sit there and I wait for him to come out of the restroom. And as soon as he comes out of the restroom, I'm like, can I get a picture with you? You don't get that from this picture, but that's the full story of this picture. Another picture would be this one. That's my little girl over there in the little red dress. The little boy there is a boy by the name of Crosby. His mom was finishing up teaching at school late this spring, and she needed somebody to watch her son while she was finishing up at school. And so you see this picture of my beautiful little girl, Nora. She has this lovely, lovely, long, blondish brown hair. But what you don't see in this picture is just a matter of hours later, she came into my kitchen where my wife and I were standing there, and she walks in and she says, "Mom, look, I have short and long hair now." And we're like, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden we notice what she's talking about, and she was talking about this. That's Rufus trying to get in on the picture too. And that's the Royals on the TV, because we always have to watch the Royals in the Turner home. But you don't see that in that original picture. But that's what was going on. The snapshot doesn't give you the full story. The next picture would be this one. A couple of years ago on a Good Friday, at our church, we had a Good Friday prayer service. And whenever we were having this Good Friday prayer service, I had my daughter with me. And my daughter was around 10 years old at this time, and I'm kind of just in the mindset of a dad. Like, I need to make sure that she's not interfering with everybody else's prayer time. And so I'm walking around making sure everything's going okay. And then I look up, and my oldest daughter, Whitley, she was nowhere to be found. And I was like, where in the world is this kid? And I was getting so angry because I thought she just ran off and she was doing something. And then I walked by one of the rooms to where you were to just sit there and journal and soak in the presence of God. And I see my little girl sitting there in the chair. Did my heart well. The next picture would be this one. This is my middle daughter, Ava. And you see this picture, and it's like, oh yeah, it's a dad sitting with his daughter on a stair. But what you don't see in this picture is that about 3 minutes after this, I had the honor of baptizing my daughter into Jesus. This next picture. The second one from the right there is my mom. She's with her brothers and her sister. They're on the back row. And in the front there are my grandma and my grandpa. This picture was taken on a Thursday. I love this picture. Because that Saturday, I was sitting at a graduation in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I got a phone call that I ignored because I was in a graduation. Then I got an immediate phone call back again. And I answered it, and they said, Andy, you need to get home. your grandpa has just passed away. It's the last picture I have of my grandpa. A snapshot doesn't give you the whole picture. It just gives you this single moment. And if we were to take snapshots of Elijah's life up to this point, there have been so many highs and a few lows, but so many highs and great pictures that he would have framed up and he would have put on his refrigerator. We would have had the picture of Elijah predicting a 3+ year drought, and this drought actually taking place. We would have had the picture of Elijah being fed by God, God providing for him by a raven and through a brook. We would have seen the picture of Elijah going to a widow's house whenever he didn't know exactly what God was doing, but he went there, and over and over and over again for months, God just continued to miraculously provide for Elijah and this woman. We would have seen the picture of Elijah with this woman's son after he had passed away, and Elijah praying to the Lord that he would heal this son, and the son being resurrected back into life. We would have seen the picture from last night. Last night's picture. You know that we would have found Elijah in a celebratory pose. He undoubtedly would have been stoked out of his mind. He had just watched God work on his behalf in a miraculous way in the presence of hundreds. But that picture would have only captured that one moment in time, because in a matter of moments, everything was about to change. It's amazing to me how quickly circumstances can change. It's amazing to me how quickly we can go from the highest of highs to the deepest and darkest valleys. And so picking up where we left off last night, you can go ahead and open up your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 18, beginning in verse 41. Again, your phone, have the Bible app ready. There, we're going to go from 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 41, all the way through 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 9, picking up exactly where we left off last night. And Elijah said to Ahab, the evil king, "Go eat and drink, for there's the sound of heavy rain." So Ahab actually did what Elijah said, and he went off to eat and drink. But Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, or Mount Carmel if you're really fancy. And he bent down on the ground and he began to pray, and he put his face between his knees. "Go and look towards the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. "There's nothing," he said. And Elijah said, okay, well, go back and look again. And he went back and he looked again, and he came back and he's like, "Elijah, there's nothing." "Well, go and look again." He came back and there was nothing. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back and look again." But then on the 7th time, the servant reported, "A cloud as small of a man as a man's hand is rising from the sea." And Elijah's thinking, that's it. That's what we've been waiting for. There it is. So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab to hitch up your chariot and to go down before the rain stops you." And as all of this is taking place, the sky, it grew black with clouds, and the wind, it rose, and a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. But the power of the Lord, just listen to this, the power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak in his belt, he ran, he bolted, he ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. It was about a 17-mile journey that they were taking, and Elijah was able to run these 17 miles faster than Ahab's chariot was able to make the 17-mile trip. And at this moment, if we would have had a snapshot of this moment, Elijah is on cloud 9. And Ahab, if we would have had a snapshot of him in this moment, he would have known that he's not just dealing with any ordinary guy, but that he is dealing with somebody who's not going to cave to peer pressure. He is dealing with somebody who's not going to be intimidated by their many pagan gods or their threats. So what does Ahab do? Ahab goes to his wife Jezebel to soothe his wounds. Now Ahab, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel, here's what she did. Here was her response. She sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." A poor loser can be a vicious enemy. Jezebel, she was unwilling to admit defeat, and she vows to kill Elijah. She is ruthless, she is bold, she is evil. And in this moment, Elijah, the man who is just like us, in this moment, I believe that Elijah cannot even begin to fathom, how are these people not repenting? How are these people not turning to the one true God? I mean, didn't they see what just happened? How can they ignore everything that God has just done in their sight? And instead of the people repenting, what he is coming across is, instead of seeing the repentance that he so desperately wanted, now he has a bounty that has been placed on his head. And so what does Elijah do? The man just like us, what does he do? Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. And I'm talking like he ran. Like, for you adults in here, he like Forrest Gump kind of ran. He just kept running and running and running and running. For the students in here, he like Captain America kind of ran. Many scholars believe that he ran up to 6 straight days and 120 miles. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. He isolated himself while he went a day's journey into the wilderness. And he came to a broom bush and he sat down under it. And he prayed that he might die. And he prayed this prayer. Some of you have prayed this prayer. I know I've prayed this prayer. I've had enough, Lord. I've taken all I can take. I'm overflowing with pain. I've had enough. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. And then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. Elijah, he is emotionally, he is spiritually, he is physically, he is ministerially drained. He is now isolated. He is disappointed. He had watched God act on his behalf. But the people didn't repent. Instead, their response was just a death threat in his direction. And here's something I can tell you about every single one of the adult leaders that you have in this room today. Here's something I can tell you about all of your youth ministers. Your youth ministers do not get up week after week after week and talk to you about the goodness of Jesus because they just want to hear themselves talk. Your youth ministers get up week after week after week telling you about the goodness of Jesus because they want to see your life transformed. That's it. And that's all that Elijah was wanting in this moment. He was wanting to see transformation. He wanted repentance. But it wasn't there, and now he finds himself in this vulnerable position. He's alone. He's scared. He's exhausted. And honestly, he's just plain depressed. Have you ever experienced any of these very, very real emotions? Have you ever felt so isolated that every time you look around your life, it just looks like everything is spinning completely out of control? That it just seems like there's thing after thing after thing, that it just keeps piling on, keeps piling on, and keeps piling on. And even though if it was just one of them, it might not have been that big of a deal. But whenever it's thing after thing after thing, it just keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier. If you go and even if you get the smallest rock, enough smallest rocks will become heavy enough that we can no longer carry the load. And Elijah, he finds himself in this depressed state. And something we must understand about depression is that depression, it does not discriminate. But depression also does not allow us to see clearly. But it is so real and it is so powerful. And it's in this moment for any of you who are saying, I just feel like that it just keeps adding on and adding on and adding on. For those of you in this room right now who are saying, my life is spinning out of control, I want you to hear what happens next. And I hope this encourages you to your very core. It says in the second half of verse 5, all at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and he drank, and then he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord, he came back a second time, and he touched him. And he said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." This is so incredibly beautiful. Because in this moment, whenever what Elijah has just done, he has just run for his life. It was the first time that Elijah had moved without God first telling him to go someplace. And he has just moved without God's blessing, without God's leading. It is in this moment where Elijah could have felt like the biggest failure who had ever stepped foot on the entire planet. You even heard his words, "I am no better than my ancestors." And in this moment that could have been the greatest defeat of Elijah's life, God comes and he visits him. And he doesn't berate him, but what he does is he provides for him. And he points him back to his previous faithfulness. Did you catch it? He baked him some bread. What is it that happened whenever Elijah went to the widow's house? She baked him some bread. And it's just this constant reminder of Elijah, I know it's hard. I know you're running. I know you're scared. I know you're tired. I know you don't understand, but I need you to hear something. I've been faithful in the past, and I'm not about to stop now. And to those of you in this room who at some point in your life, you've experienced the goodness of Jesus, but then things just keep piling on and piling on and piling on. I want you to hear this. He's been faithful to you in the past, and he's not about to stop now. And in Elijah's moments of weakness, listen, God shows him mercy, and he allows him to rest. It is so similar to the story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15. It's an incredible chapter to where Jesus just tells three different stories. He tells a story about a lost sheep, and then he tells a story about a lost coin, and then he tells a story about a prodigal son. And the story of the prodigal son, most of you probably know this on some level, but the story is basically the son comes to his father, the father representing God, and he comes to his father and says, "Please, just give me my share of the inheritance now, of my inheritance now." In other words, he's saying to his father, I wish you would just go ahead and die. That way I could have my share of the inheritance. He took the inheritance and he went off into a distant land. And he squandered it all in wild living. And whenever he ended up with nothing, he went to the classified ads and he tried to find some sort of a job. And he found a job at a local pig farm. And he was in such a desperate position that the pig slop that he was feeding the pigs actually looked appetizing to him. And it was in this moment of brokenness, it was in this moment of loneliness, it was in this moment of depression that he remembered, man, even the servants at my dad's house have it so much better than me. And so he began to prepare this speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and I have sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, but please take me back as one of your hired men. And after he had written out the perfect speech, he began to make his way back to his father's house. And as he was making the trip that way, he's rehearsing over and over and over again, making sure he knows his lines, making sure he knows how to deliver it properly. But as he was still a ways off, the father sees an all too familiar silhouette coming over the horizon. And he sees his son coming, and the father jumps down off of his porch. He hikes up his skirt, and he begins to run to his son. And the son comes into the presence of his father, and the father, and he begins his speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your... And all of a sudden, the father just smacks him over his mouth, stop. I don't want to hear it. And he calls his servants and he says, kill the fattened calf, get the ring, get the robe, get the sandals. We are about to party because my son who was lost, he has now been found. Because my son who was dead, he is now alive. And in this moment, we can realize something that is so, so true. You can run 1,000 miles in the opposite direction of the God, the creator of the universe. You can run as far as you can possibly run away from the presence of Jesus. But as soon as you stop and as soon as you turn around, you will find out that Jesus is right there with you. Man, I hope that can encourage some of you today. So Elijah, he got up and he ate and he drank. And strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and he spent the night. Mount Horeb, many of you may not know this, but Mount Horeb has another name in the Old Testament. It was also known as Mount Sinai. And if you read through the book of Exodus, you will realize that Mount Sinai plays a pretty big role in a lot of the things that God was doing in his relationship with Moses. It was on Mount Sinai where God comes to Moses and he says, you can ask me for anything. You can ask me for absolutely anything. And Moses, in his request, he says, Lord, will you show me your glory? And God, knowing that Moses could not withstand the full glory of his presence, he says, I will show you my glory, but what you need to do is you need to go hide in this cleft of the rock. You need to go hide in this cave, and I will walk past you. You cannot look at my front, but you will be able to look at my back. And in this place, on Mount Horeb, on Mount Sinai, the presence of God passed right in front of Moses. And so many scholars believe that the very cave that Elijah is now resting in is the very cave that Moses was in whenever he saw the glory of God. Are you tired? Are you hurting? Are you broken? Are you lonely? Are you depressed? Go find yourself in the presence of God. So here's my question for all of you today. If we were to take a snapshot of your life today, what would we see? In this moment, day 3 of CIY Move, if we were to take a snapshot of your life today, what exactly would we see? Would we see somebody who feels completely isolated? Would we see somebody who feels like they are completely alone? Would we see somebody who can see the beginning of God working in their life? Could we see the picture of someone who is beginning to grow? Could we see the picture of somebody who is beginning to find the hope that can only be found in Jesus? Could we find a picture of somebody who is absolutely exhausted from just trying to keep up the appearance that you want others to believe is really you? Would it be a picture of somebody who's hurting, of somebody who's confused, of somebody who's running, of somebody who's depressed? I want to warn you guys today. Today's going to be heavy. It's going to be deep. And the only thing that I feel like I can ask of you today is this. Please be honest. Please be honest. Because trying to portray yourself as something you're not doesn't make you brave, it doesn't make you strong, it makes you dishonest, and it doesn't help anyone. It's just a snapshot. It's a snapshot, and the beauty about a snapshot is that where you are today is not where you have to stay. You have nothing to hide. Your weakness, your sin, your pain, your depression, it is not a surprise to God. And what I can promise you is that He is present in your pain. You see, church, we were never promised a life free of pain. But we are promised, because of the sacrifice and the resurrection of Jesus, that we will never be alone. So here's what I want you to do. You ready? Go ahead. Take your selfie right now. What do you see?